Okay, chapter 2 is the chemical basis of life. And chemistry is huge in biology. We are walking, talking blobs of chemicals. Our bodies are made of chemicals. We use chemicals. Our surroundings are made of chemicals. The environment's chemicals. We use chemicals in everything. Our DNA is chemicals. Our lipids, our carbohydrates, everything is a chemical and will go through chemical reactions. So we're going to take a look at what a chemical reaction is in an atom and how we use those. One kind of cool animal that uses chemicals is the rattlebox moth. It produces an alkaloid chemical that protects it from being eaten. The male moth also uses that to attract a female. So the boy with the biggest bag of alkaloid chemicals to give to the female to protect her after mating wins the most mates. So that's a pheromone that the animals use it to communicate between each other and then use it as a defense against other things, predators. All right, elements, atoms, and molecules. Living organisms are composed of about 25 chemical elements. There's a lot more than that. There's 92 naturally occurring ones, and there's a whole bunch more. I think we're up to 116 right now. It keeps changing. Only about 25 are really essential to life, the ones we find here on Earth that we use in our bodies. The ones that we use in our bodies are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. That's most of all living things. And the way to remember it is S.P. Cohen. We'll cover most of those: sulfur, phosphorus, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen. Another way to remember it is schnapps, but spelled kind of funny. But both of those will help you remember these are the ones that are important for living things. There's other ones that we don't use, we don't want in our bodies. They're no help to us. All right, trace elements, not the big ones, but the minor ones, things like iodine, are important to our health sometimes. And here you can see the woman with the goiter. That is from lack of iodine. So when you buy salt in the U.S., a lot of times you will see that it is added to the salt. And that's to protect against goiters. A lot of different products in the U.S. will have trace elements added and vitamins added to make sure that people are healthy and get all of those vitamins, which aren't necessarily easy to get. All right, matter. Okay, fundamental building blocks. Here we go. Matter is all material that occupies space and has mass. That's the definition of what matter is. Most matter, the matter we're concerned with in biology, is composed of atoms. We're not talking, crazy subatomic particles in outer space here. We're just talking biology. An atom is the simplest form of matter that is not divisible into simpler substances. What that means is I could take an atom of gold, and it is still gold. If you just take its protons, neutrons, and electrons, it's no longer gold. It is just protons, neutrons, and electrons. All right? Elements are made of atoms. All right, so here we go. We have a picture of an atom. There's different ways of picturing it. On the left side, you will see they have electron clouds, essentially, is what they are. They're in shells and orbitals, but there's different ways of looking at where the electrons are. On the right side, you'll see the typical Bohr model for an atom. You have the protons and neutrons in the inside, and you have the electrons whizzing around the outside. This is obviously not what something looks like. It's a model, but it's a very useful model for us when we talk about the chemistry of life. Subatomic particles are things smaller than an atom, subatomic. So what are those? Those are protons, neutrons, and electrons. Again, you find the protons and the neutrons on the inside. You find the electrons on the outside arranged in electron shells. When we are talking about chemistry, all chemical reactions are with the electrons. The electrons are what concerns us. The protons and the neutrons, they don't play that game. They're on the inside protected. They can be radioactive or isotopes, but they're not chemistry. Okay. So how do we know what an element is? What element is it that we are looking at? We know that by the number of protons. So if something has one proton, I guarantee you it is hydrogen. I don't care how many neutrons or electrons it has. If it has two, it is helium, and so on and so forth down the periodic table. The protons tell you what element it is. Neutrons can tell you whether it's going to be radioactive or not, and electrons will tell you whether it's an ion or it's in some kind of chemical reaction. The atomic number, again, this is going to be what element it is the number of protons. Again, atomic number 1, hydrogen. Atomic number 2, helium. 3, lithium, so on and so forth. The mass number is how much it weighs. It's the number of protons and neutrons. Protons weigh 1, neutrons weigh 1. Electrons don't weigh anything that we're concerned with. They essentially have no weight, so we're only worried about protons and neutrons. Isotopes have varying numbers of neutrons, okay? And then the atomic weight is the average of the mass of all. Alright, so isotopes is where we vary the number of neutrons. Now remember, we can't vary the number of protons without changing the actual element. If we change the number of protons in carbon, you won't have carbon anymore. Carbon always has 6, 100% of the time. But you can change the number of neutrons. It doesn't matter to what element it is. What it can do is make it radioactive. If it has too many neutrons in the nucleus gets heavy, and so you can see carbon-14 has 8 neutrons. That's too many for carbon. Carbon-14 becomes radioactive. Okay, radioactive isotopes. We always think radioactive is bad. We're going to ban it from Sebastopol, la la la. Not necessarily. Radioactive things can be quite helpful in medicine. They are used in tracers. They are used to see what's going on when molecules undergo chemical reactions inside of an organism. So they can be used in diagnosis. They can actually be quite helpful. Now, obviously, there's a danger associated with them. So people who do this are very, very careful, but they are useful. Okay, speaking of diagnosis, radioactive tracers are used for diagnosis, and PET imaging, which is positron emission tomography, uses radioactive tracers, usually oxygen, and they inject that either into your bloodstream, and they can make radioactive glucose, or they can make radioactive water, depending on what they're looking at, and then they will follow that through the body using these PET scan imagery here, which is a way that radioactive things can be positive. Okay, when we talk about chemistry, I said it's all about the electrons, so you have to think about electron shells. Always, you have 2 electrons in the first shell. That's hydrogen and helium, are the first 2 elements, and they'll have up to 2 electrons in the first shell. And then for the second shell, it's going to go up to 8 electrons in that shell, and then the third shell is up to 8 electrons in the third shell. And that's most of the chemistry we're going to look at in biology. In chemistry, they'll get more detailed, but if you get that, you'll get the basis. Okay, atoms whose shells are not full want to gain an electron, and no, you're not really supposed to use the term want, but it's the best way of describing this. If they're missing just 1 electron, they really pull to get 1 more. On the other hand, if they have just 1 electron in their outer shell, the last shell that is out there, they tend to get rid of it rather easily. The goal seems to be to have full shells, right? 2, 8, 8. And if the shells are full, then they don't want to play. But if they are missing 1, or if they have an extra, then they will want to form chemical bonds. Okay, elements can combine to form chemical bonds, and they're going to form in fixed ratios, and that is going to be because, again, of these electrons. If they need one electron, they're going to get together with something that has one extra electron, and then both of the ions will have complete shells and they will be happy. Live happily ever after. Sodium is classic in that it'll have one, chlorine needs one, and they will combine to form yummy table salt, sodium chloride. Okay. A molecule is a distinct chemical substance results in the combination of two or more atoms. So they can be the same atom for a molecule. It can be hydrogen to hydrogen, oxygen to oxygen. Elements can combine to form compounds. A compound is two or more atoms in a fixed ratio. And there are different combinations of atoms determine the unique property of each compound. And a chemical bond is defined when two or more atoms share electrons or donate or accept electrons. They can do either. They can share it or they can donate or an electron, and we have a chemical bond. There's three types: covalent, ionic, hydrogen. All right, the three types of chemical bonds. First is covalent. This is when they share electrons. If they share electrons unequally, one takes it a bit more, you get something called polar covalent. That's water. If you get non-polar bonding, that's equal sharing. It's exactly equal between the two atoms. Polar will give you a slight positive and a slight negative. Ionic bonds are where one essentially gives away the electron to the other. The cation is the positive and the anion is negative. Hydrogen is between molecules. Alright, so here we go. We can see in sodium, I know it looks like up here that sodium has, it does have one electron right here that's just kind of floating out there. That means if it just has one, it really, really, really wants to get rid of that one and just go to the second shell here and have it be full. On the other hand, over here, chlorine, you can see it's almost full. It's got 7 sitting here, and it just needs one more. That means that chlorine is going to want to bind with sodium and get that one electron. Okay, when sodium binds with chlorine and gets that one electron, they're both going to have full outer shells and therefore live happily ever after. These attractions between opposites, the sodium is considered here, it's going to have a positive charge and it's going to gives the negative to chlorine. So look right here, here's the negative, it's going to go fill chlorine. Chlorine is then going to have an extra negative charge that will make it happy. It'll have a complete outer shell. Covalent bonds are different. They're not going to give away the electrons. They're going to share them. And the way I picture this is two sisters, and they both take the same shoe size, say 8, and they each have 4 pairs of shoes. Well, they could have 8 pairs of shoes for their outfits if they choose to share their shoes. And so atoms will do this. They'll share, and it'll feel like they have 8 pairs right up until the sister breaks a pair and then refuses to pay for it. That's a separate story, though. Okay, molecules can be represented in different ways. And over here on the left here, you're just going to see basic formula right here. Okay, that's just, H2 is just going to be 2 hydrogen atoms. All right, then you can show the electron configuration. That's here. It is showing that they each had 1 electron, and they are now each kind of sharing that electron right there. Over here, on this side, we have the bond, okay, and that's just hydrogen bonded singularly to hydrogen.